Thank you for joining us this morning, this afternoon, or this evening, wherever you are. Before we begin, this is Rachel Ong, the technical host for this session from ERA, and we will begin with a few virtual housekeeping announcements. This session provides interpretation spoken. Please go to interpretation to choose your language channel. Mute original audio to only hear the interpreter. In addition, this session provides sign language interpretation. Welcome to the Global South Women's Forum on Sustainable Development 2021, hosted by International Women's Rights Action Watch Asia Pacific. And we would like to remind participants to please turn off your videos and mute your microphones at all times for a pleasant experience. If you are experiencing slow bandwidth, please close any unnecessary programs and/or applications on your device. Feel free to use the public chat box to engage with one another throughout the session. Do note that this session is live streamed on our Facebook page, and the recording will be available publicly afterwards. We are committed to making sure that GSWF 2021 is an inclusive and safe digital environment, and we will not tolerate harassment of any kind, including but not limited to deliberate intimidation, sustained disruption of discussions. Participants are obliged to avoid replicating societal prejudices and inequalities. Participants who engage in disruptive behavior may be removed without notice. And with that, we hand the floor over to our session moderator, Mrinalini, please.
Thank you, Rachel, and for ERA for this invitation to be part of this global forum. It's just amazing to see a lot of discussions taking place over the few days, and happy to be here to host this session on Indigenous women's rights and environmental justice. It is nothing new for women to be disproportionately experiencing the effects of environmental degradation, be it biodiversity loss, climate change, and in recent years, the pandemic, on our bodies, on our children, on our territories, and our daily chores. Why? Precisely because we are women, pure and simple, because our basic rights continue to be denied us in different ways and in different degrees the world over, particularly in the global South. We know that gender inequality limits not only women's physical and economic mobility, but also, in many places, their representation and opportunities, making us more vulnerable to growing environmental tensions and to climate situations that present multiple hazards, above all for the poorest women, the subordinate ones, including those who remain unrepresented in the areas of public policy. And also today's discussion on how we will explore those intersectionalities from Indigenous women's perspectives. Today, I'm very, very happy to host this session with our champions, our agents of change, to share their experiences from local, national, region to global arenas in various international biodiversity-related discussions. So without further ado, let me present our amazing women who are here with us today. So I would also ask the speakers to put on their videos on. So first, and say a short hello. So first we have Edna Kaptoyo from Kenya. Edna is a social development specialist, Indigenous people's rights and climate justice advocate. She has a focus on environmental governance, Indigenous people's rights, and sustainable development projects and policy for over 15 years. Edna is passionate about sustainable development and the promotion of interdisciplinary approaches to capacity building, project design, and project implementation and policy. Hi, Edna. Currently, Edna works at the PAWANKA Fund, which is an Indigenous-led fund to change the way philanthropy is done guided by Indigenous values of reciprocity, and it has a global Indigenous governance body comprised of leaders from North America, Latin America, Asia, Africa, Arctic, Pacific, and Russia. So Edna, thank you so much. Also considering that Kenya, it's really early in the morning. So thank you for being here. Next, we have Kanlaya Chularattakorn. Kanlaya is an Indigenous woman from the north of Thailand. She's committed to work and advocate for the rights of Indigenous women in Thailand. She has over a decade of experience in working in capacity development and Indigenous women in leadership, policy, and advocacy, including conducting research and documenting case studies of Indigenous peoples and related issues, including human rights violations against Indigenous women in Thailand. Hi, Kanlaya Jum. Hope I can see you there. So thank you so much for also joining us today. Next, we have Aydah Akao, who is a coordinator of the Network of Indigenous Peoples and joins us from Solomon Islands. And Indigenous women from Malaita and Temau province in Solomon Islands, Aydah has been working supporting community conservation and resilience initiative through traditional knowledge and empowering women through awareness on impacts of logging, mining, and women's rights issues, and also is a case management team leader for Family Support Center, which works to address gender-based violence against women and girls. So Aydah, thank you so much for also joining us today. Last but not the least, we have Sushila Kumari Thapa Magar. Sushila belongs to the Magar Indigenous people from Nepal. She is a forester and holds an MSc in mountain forestry. She has more than 15 years experience in good governance, economic empowerment, gender equality and social inclusion, and advocacy. Sushila is currently the IWNT Fund Monitoring, Learning and Evaluation Coordinator at FIMI, which is the International Indigenous Women's Forum based in Lima, Peru, and organizing, promoting Indigenous women's rights. So thank you all for being here. Having looked at this discussion today, we will be hearing from our colleagues about the work that they've been doing. So the focus of our discussion around here is a sharing and strategizing key recommendations for a rights-based approach to environmental governance. So I will get into it because we have an hour. So I think you see all my presenters here. So first, Kanlaya and Aydah, because you have worked in from the local to the regional national perspective, I would really like to know is from your perspective, a little bit about your work and how you have seen the problem and how you're seeking to change it, and what would be the enabling condition for your work. So Kanlaya, Jung, maybe I'll start from you to share a little bit about your work and what you've been doing and what you hope to achieve. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tina. Should I open the video also? The video?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Hi, this is Kanlaya from Thailand, from the north of Thailand, Chiang Mai. I'm happy to be part of this plenary today. When talking about the environmental justice in Thailand for Indigenous women, I think the challenge for us now, especially Indigenous women, is that Indigenous people are not recognized now by the law, that they are Indigenous people in Thailand. And also there's still a very big misunderstanding and also mistrust in our way of life, that we could be living together in harmony with the nature, with the forest, because throughout the past 50 years, there has always been a negative image now on the Indigenous people of Thailand, that we are the destroyer of the forest, of the nature. Our way of life are harmful now to the nature, to the forest. But in fact, if you look at the map of Thailand now, and also the forest areas now in Thailand now, the forest area in Thailand where Indigenous people are living now. I mean, where we live now, there are forests now. there's no forest in the city. There's no forest in central Thailand. Most of the forest areas in Thailand are in the north of Thailand, where there are lots of indigenous communities located. So yeah, the challenge now for us is the non-recognition of indigenous people in Thailand. And this has been our challenge, and what we face here is that because we are not recognized and we are seen as something that could be harm now to the nature. So many from time to times now there are indigenous communities are relocated now from our homeland, from the forest areas into lowland areas, which is not something that appropriate now for our way of life. And we need to do a lot of adjustment, and still, you know, because we are not used to that kind of environment, climate, and also environment. So it's very difficult for us to really adapt. One important cases is the Kankajan, the current people of the Kankajan National Park in Phetchaburi province. The people have been relocated, have been moved from their homeland in the Kankajan National Park out of their homeland to live in another place. But still, you know, over 25 years now, people are still struggling to adjust to the new environment, and also because what they have lived in for 100 years and what they are living with now is so much different. So people are really struggling with this. So yeah, I don't know, maybe Tina, you want me to say something?
No, thank you so much, Kanlaya. I think this is what we really wanted, to kind of ground the session into what the realities are for Indigenous peoples, including for Indigenous women. And of course, this is always a long discussion, overdue discussion on looking at the recognition and respect of Indigenous peoples' rights to their land and territories. A big discussion on all the environmental policies currently happening. And this is a reality that is still on the ground, including whether we might have a lot of safeguards and a lot of relevant instruments. We still are struggling for this basic recognition of our rights. So thank you. So for this introduction, so going from the mountains to the seas. So from North Thailand, we will go all the way to Solomon Islands. So Aydah, from your experience and your work, could you share some of your experiences from the Solomon Islands?
Thank you, Tina. I'm happy to be part of this plenary discussion this afternoon, and to be part, to share this beautiful experience with all you beautiful women out there. Yes, so in terms of our work, our NIPS work, working with local communities in the Solomon Islands, we have come up with, and also according to NBSAP, the National Biodiversity Strategic Action Plan for Solomon Islands, and as well as some specialist report, it has shown that it has indicated accelerating loss of biodiversity in Solomon Islands, and it's manifested through loss of yields from food gardens, unclean water in streams, lots, and also a loss of cultural norms and practices. And of course, poor economic returns to support livelihood. And we're also seeing increasing of vulnerability to natural disaster due to climate change. And of course, destructive activities like logging and mining, which cause flooding. And of course, we have also increasing this experience in increase of levels of hardship or poverty, I should say. So what our women are in the forefront of all these experiences right now. In terms of women participation in our plight in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and also Indigenous women's rights and environmental justice, my experience working with our Indigenous people is that our women in the rural areas are spending more time trying to earn money to support their family, especially we have children going to school, so that is a challenge. So they're spending more time in that. And also in our communities, in a rural community setup, we're talking about the structure, leadership. We have men who are the leaders. We have our chiefs. But today, I'm pleased to say that most of our men who are chiefs in the villages are supporting our women right now. And we are coming to realize that women are very important partners in achieving all our global goals for sustainable development, and also a society or community where everyone is working together in conserving our biodiversity. Because for us in the country, biodiversity has a direct link to our people. It is our livelihood. So it is, we depend on our biodiversity for food, and also for to sell what extra we have to help our women, our children who are going to school. And also our biodiversity gives us, provide us with water and all the basic needs our women and all our people, and we say underrepresented, depend very much on. So clearly, it is very important to ensure that whatever processes, project, discussions we are having right now, conversations we're having right now, we must put women at the center of all this and recognize their issues. Then and only then we can gain more participation of women who are very vital in conservation, in the conservation of our biodiversity, which is largely in our rural areas.
Aydah, no, thank you so much for building upon that. And I think what you really talked about is really very crucial, is regarding the recognition of roles that women play, not only in conservation, but also at homes. Like you're talking about care work, which really gets unnoticed because it's just seen as, well, that's just what women are supposed to do. So not really looking at the hardships as looking at it as their contributions for, because you even say a well-being of a community, and women play a very big role in that. And of course, the main question that you talked about is on leadership in decision-making, which is really very important. But also, like you shared experience, that is very important to also have the support of the men in the community. And that's what we talk about, is when we talk about women's rights, we're not fighting for a different space. We're fighting for the same space, and we're fighting for not being different, but being as a collective part of the community. And that's why we need the recognition of women. To say that we are already part of it, we really need the recognition. And for that recognition to also recognize our role as actors, as being able to be responsible for sound decision-making, let's put it this way, right? Mm-hmm. So thank you so much for sharing that. Now, coming from this local experience, and also one of the discussions that we wanted to take from the sharing is also looking at some of the regional or international discussions. And Aydah just pointed out about one of the discussions or negotiations ongoing right now is on the global biodiversity framework under the Convention on Biological Diversity, including in climate, all these meetings that are taking place. So this is really very important to also ensure that these international policy decision makings have actions also for women. So thank you so much for bringing in that perspective too. Now, going on to my other two colleagues, Edna and Sushila, I want to ask your perspective on the importance of how finance as a mechanism is important in contributing to ensuring gender equality and women's empowerment in environment and sustainable development context, especially during this post-COVID, where everybody's talking about global green economic recovery, whether we are talking about climate finance or whether we are talking about biodiversity finance. So Edna, I will ask you to please take the floor first, because you also followed as an advocate from Indigenous peoples. We have met through different spaces, and you've also been following the UNCCC, and now you're also with an Indigenous fund yourself. So love to hear your perspective.
Thank you, Tina, and thank you all for joining the session. We are happy to be part of the forum as Indigenous women to advance also our voices in terms of environmental justice issues and also matters pertaining to sustainable development. As we know, the 2030 agenda really talks about empowering women and gender equality. However, this requires significant resources if we would like to see change happening at the local level, whether it's technical resources or financial. Different kinds of support is actually required and important really to advance the agenda. Without these initiatives will not be able to be scaled up. And working with PAWANKA Fund, as you know, it was set up in 2014 on the auspices of the World Conference of Indigenous People, which was held up, and they realized a gap in terms of having an Indigenous-led fund really going directly to support Indigenous people's initiatives globally. As Tina had highlighted, it works in 7 sociocultural regions. And coming from PAWANKA, I think the most important lessons in terms of working especially on environmental justice work and with Indigenous women led in organizations, even though we work broadly with Indigenous people's organizations globally, one of the lessons why it's important really in terms of finance in advancing women empowerment is because a lot of the initiatives we've seen, especially whether it's in implementing environmental initiatives, Indigenous women really are already implementing initiatives that are focusing on revitalizing traditional knowledge and practices, which are really important in continuation of advancing climate resilience within their communities, and also facilitating intergenerational learning, which is important to continue learning within our communities and also support communities in challenging times. And even during post-COVID, what we saw with our Indigenous Women's Network in Asia, in Africa, was that the women were leading also even in supporting communities in revitalizing the traditional food systems. As you know, that was one of the areas hit a lot by COVID, the pandemic, access to food, access to water. And so we have partners working on revitalization of this, and a lot of women were providing the leadership, even providing resources and social support systems that were not being monetized, but offering to the community. And this is key to recognize as why it's important, really, finance is important in advancing that. As well, the initiatives Indigenous women have been leading, the ones we've been working with, have carried out initiatives that are collective in nature. So initiatives supporting communities generally and really supporting the of resilience for the whole community is, as you look at those in Africa, like African Indigenous Women Organization, Central Africa Network, we're implementing initiatives focused on the forest sector, setting up traditional Indigenous knowledge holders network within communities where they're working within Cameroon. And these networks are sustained by having community structures. And the importance is a collective effort and the collective building of resilience that they are working towards. And so when you give resources to women-led organizations, they are able to advance work that is collective in nature. So it saves a lot of cost. So it's value for money as well in terms of philanthropy supporting such initiatives. The other lesson as well in terms of importance of finance was the fact that beyond supporting Indigenous women-led organizations, we learned that Indigenous women-led organizations were able to access spaces or have opportunities with the support that otherwise they wouldn't have. So we've had women, for instance, we had partners from Indonesia, Aman Kalba, from the Kalimantan region, and using the funding, they were able to gain capacity to engage in cultural mapping initiatives and also empowering themselves in terms of economic initiatives and also in terms of other work they were doing on resilience building. And the support was important because it allowed them to access leadership spaces through advocacy at the local level. And so they've been able to engage beyond more than one mapping activity, and they've spread out to 8 communities, and we intend to also support them to scale up and also engage more so that we can build this kind of leadership opportunities for women so that they're able to also not only influence decision making, but also create jobs. But generally as well speaking is to say that why we are able to do importance of finance is also to understand that it's not only looking at impact, but also the way you provide this kind of support. We require in terms of shifting power, giving community organization the power and also the full rights to make decisions and decide on the priorities and needs, because we understand communities themselves know what they need to do. They know the priorities they have and the best way to do, and they hold the knowledge, which is important. Aydah and Kanlaya have highlighted. So it's important to support and provide direct support to them, and PAWANKA ensures it does that, and also really establishing long partnership, and we call them partners, not grantees, and with this partnership also building trust based on their values and indigenous systems that are existing. And also one of the important things we have is as well trying to monitor as well how even organizations that are not led by women are advancing gender equality. So PAWANKA has a cultural due diligence process, and one of the elements is they have to monitor gender equality and empowerment under 8 of the indicators that we do have as PAWANKA Fund. And the other support is also offering the peer-to-peer learning support amongst the regions we work with globally, and also establishing a mentorship support through the Global Guiding Committee and also the different partners we have. We take them through a mentorship program so that they're able to also build their technical capacity as well and administrative, even though even some are not legally registered, but you work with them to support them through such, and also to build these networks based on solidarity and trust. Back to you, Tina.
Edna, thank you so very much for sharing this rich experience of the need for a fund that would be provided for Indigenous peoples, looking at their priorities and looking at what they really want to engage with, and how they would be, how the funds would give them the resources to be able to plan out how they want the funds to support their work. So of course, what you really talked about is very fundamental of the contributions of women, as especially during the pandemic, on food security and well-being of community, and also intergenerational guardians, not only from home sphere, but also looking at the traditional knowledge transfer. So thank you so very much. I will go next to Sushila. Sushila, if you could also share your experience also with what would be the enabling conditions for a gender responsive funding to ensure women's empowerment, especially Indigenous women. So the floor is yours. And for speakers, please do speak a little bit slowly because we have interpretation. So we will make sure that everybody's heard. And also for our participants, please feel free to put in your questions in the chat, and we will make sure that our speakers will respond also on the chat if we run out of time. So Sushila, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tina. And thank you for the opportunity to share some ideas, thoughts from Indigenous women's perspective and co-sharing this space with all our sisters here. Noting 476 million Indigenous people, which constitute 6% of global population, which manages and hold tenure of around 22% of world land surface as indigenous territories, and protecting 80% of global diversity. Land, territory, and resources shape their identities, culture, and way of survival. Their well-being, socio-economic, culture empowerment is embedded on the health of the nature they live in, and vice versa. Indigenous women within the indigenous people play vital role to generate, protect, transfer indigenous knowledge and practices to create balance between nature and their community, educating the future generation, which we already heard from our sisters earlier. However, indigenous women's role as environment stewards are undermined and are under attack. People are in search of solution to heal the Mother Earth, which is damaged by unsustainable development practices, while healers are suffering from environmental injustices. Our identities, land, territory, and resources are jeopardized with the development aggression. Their environments are degraded, water sources are disappearing and polluted, and no more drinkable. Biodiversity and food diversity are shrinking. Traditional livelihood system and income source are not among the options anymore. Their resources are depleting and they are facing different health problems, and COVID is one of them. Challenges to sustain collective way of living is growing more than ever. Further, militarization, criminalization, red tagging, extrajudicial killing, imprisonment, assault, harassment, discrimination, violence, displacement, forced migrations, loss of traditional and customary institutions and practices, languages, even the populations, and so on, are compounded issues due to political unwillingness. Stereotyping, patriarchy, historical culture, and systemic barrier remains the constant challenge as a woman, as indigenous women, with the triple marginalization. Their fundamental rights are violated, and list of the right violation goes further beyond. Hence, addressing their issues, empowering their agencies, amplifying their voices are critical to uphold and ensure enjoyments of their rights, including environmental rights. FIMI is a global mechanism to shape indigenous women's agenda, leadership, and movement, working across 7 socioeconomic, sociocultural regions, as PAWANKA already mentioned, as like PAWANKA. Sharing on behalf of IWNT, a philanthropic wings of FIMI, investment to indigenous women, especially through indigenous women's organization and mechanism, accelerate the better understanding and reflection of the issues and the ground realities, improve the participation and representation and just access to the needful resources. We strengthen the movement and advocacy at all levels, provide flexibility to adapt according to their local context, and adopt the multiple strategy, imparting and promoting synergy and collective capacities. So that's why very recently FIMI, together with the regional network, hosted a Second World Conference of Indigenous Women, which came up with Global Declaration, which is an outcome document of the conference. Hence, iterate, the adequate resource investment is important to uphold the human right that contributes to ensure gender equality and women's empowerment, recognizing multiple identities and issues of indigenous women, and making the global declaration, making the world, better place to live in. More zooming into environment justice. Indigenous women hold the knowledge of biodiversity, forest, water, and resource management, climate solutions, which can reverse the trend of global crisis toward the sustainable development that global communities are striving for and fighting against. COVID has disproportionately affected Indigenous women socio-culturally, politically, and economically, putting their human rights in peril. Amid the COVID, Indigenous women has demonstrated and restored the humanity with collectiveness and empathy in different forms, aspiring others for building back the faith on humanity and making world better place to live in. Hence, while pandemic is still ongoing, as a global threat, investment in their physical and mental health, education, socioeconomic empowerment, livelihood, resilience building, and replicating their good practices both during and post-pandemic is very, very crucial. So recognizing them, accounting and rewarding their contribution are must for humankind and Mother Earth. Just finance, holding the principle of leaving no one behind, and recognizing the collective right of indigenous women is must. Thank you.
Thank you, Sushila. Thank you for those wonderful, aspiring words. And I think you put in so much of brought in some complex issues that are very relevant, and we haven't even scraped the surface. You talked about the defenders and healers of Mother Earth. We haven't even indulged in that. Women play such an important role in defending our biodiversity, our environment. You talked about the link with biodiversity and livelihoods and health. And I think this is what we're really talking about. When you're talking about leaving no one behind, one of the core principles we should have is that everyone should have a right to a healthy environment. This includes not only quantity of water, but also the quality of water. Like some of the presenters talked about how biodiversity loss has been impacting not only the social, cultural, economic, but also just the overall life of Indigenous peoples and local communities. And I think you also brought in the physical and mental health, and we talked about gender-based violence linked up with the environment, and this is also linked up with the development projects that come in. So how do you really take this huge, big part of these diverse situations and issues and really decipher? We really do need to have these discussions more often and more in depth. So thank you so much for the speakers. I see some wonderful questions in the chat, and I would encourage our speakers to respond to some of them. Unfortunately, we have only an hour. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to also share an experience from one of our members in India about their struggles. So this is, so we will show a movie, and we might cut it off a little bit of it. It's about 7 minutes long. It's just called Tingapali. It is a story about how, harassed by the timber mafia for decades, the women in the village decided to take matters into their own hands to save their forest. This is a story from the Gundarabari. It's a tribal village nestled in the forest of the Nayangra district of Odisha in India. So I would ask Marissa or Rachel to play the movie. So please be with us here to enjoy this wonderful, inspirational.
आमे पालिया आसुचु एटी किए गोटे पसि जाइछि ताको आमे महिला धरुचु तापरे गाँ को डाकुचु गाँ को डाकले गाँ महिला पुरुष मिसिक आसुंती ताको नौचु कोठ घरे थौचु रखिकी ताको दंड विधान जहाँ दबा कथा दौचु आ ଆଉ ଆମ ଗାଁ ବାହାଘର ଗୋଟେ ହେଉଥିଲା ସବୁ ପୁରୁଷମାନେ ପଳେଇଥିଲେ ଆମେ 5-6 ଜଣ ଯାଇଥିଲୁ ଯିବା ଭିତରେ ସିଏ କ'ଣ କରିଛି ସେ ଭିତରେ ଭର୍ତ୍ତି କରିଦେଲା ଗାଡ଼ିଟା ଆମେ କହିଲୁ ଶାଗନ କାଟିବୁ ଆଜି ଆମେ ଛପିକି ରହିଲୁ ସିଏ ଛାଇବନ ଆସିଲା ଆମେ କ'ଣ କଲୁ ଆମେ ଏମିତି ଜଗିଲୁ ଠେଙ୍ଗାଟାକୁ ଧରିକି ଜଗିଲୁ ସେ କିଛିଟା ନି ମଡ଼େଇ ନେଲା ଆକାଶରେ ତାର କାଠ ଫାଟ ବାଡ଼େଇକି ଆସ ଗୁରୁତ୍ୱ କଲେ
ବାଇଗଣରେ ପକେଇଲାନି ଖାଲି ଆଳୁ ଭାଜିବ
ନାଇଁ ସେ ମୋ ପୁଅ ଭଲ ପାଉନି
ଗାଧେଇଛୁ
ହଁ ଆମ ଜଙ୍ଗଲ ଆମେ ଜଗିଛୁ ଆଉ ସିଏ କ'ଣ ଜଗିବ ଆମ ପାଇଁ ଆମ ଜଙ୍ଗଲଟା ସିଏ କ'ଣ ପାଇଁ କରିବ ସେ ଆମକୁ ସେ ଛାଡ଼ିବ କି କାଠ ଟଙ୍କା ମିଳିବନି ଆମେ ତ ଏଡ଼ିକି ଦିନ ଏଡ଼ିକି ଦିନ ବଢ଼େଇଛୁ ସିଏ କ'ଣ ପାଇଁ ସେ ଜଗିବ ଆମେ ତାକୁ ସେଥିପାଇଁ ଦେଉନୁ ନାହିଁ କଲୁ ଆମେ ତ ଆଦିବାସୀ ଲୋକ ଆମେ ଜଙ୍ଗଲରେ ଆମେ ବଢ଼ିବା କଥା ଆମେ ତାକୁ ଦେବୁ କାହିଁକି ଫରେଷ୍ଟକୁ ଆମେ ଦେବୁନି ଆମ ଜଙ୍ଗଲ ଆମର
ରୋଷେଇବାସ କରି ପାଳି ଦିନ ଠେଙ୍ଗା ଧରିକି ଆସିକି ଜଙ୍ଗଲରେ ଗୋବର ଗୁହାଳ ସବୁ
ରନ୍ଧା ବଢ଼ା ସ୍ୱାମୀ ପିଲାକୁ ଦେଇକି ଖାଇ ସାରିବେ ସେ ଯିଏ ଯୁଆଡ଼େ ଯିବେ ଦୁଆର ଘର ଦେଇକି ଆମେ ଚାଲିବୁ
ଆଗେ କି ନଣ୍ଡା ପାହାଡ଼ ଥିଲା ଗଛ ବୁଦା କିଛି
ନଥିଲା ଏମିତି ଥିଲା
ଆମେ ହିଁ ଜଗିକି 30 ବର୍ଷ ହେଲା ଜଗିକି ଆଗକୁ ବଢ଼େଇକି କିଛି ଆମକୁ ସିଅ ମୂଳ ସବୁ ମିଳୁଛି
ସିଏ ଜଗିବାରେ ସେଠୁ ଇଏ ଆମ ମଉଜା ଭାଇ ଇଏ ଜଗିବାରେ ତା ଆଗକୁ ଯେମିତି କାଠ ଡାଙ୍ଗ ହାଣିକି ବିଶେଷ ଗଲା ହାରି ଆମେ ମାଇକିନା ଝିଅ ବାହାରିଲୁ ସେ ଯେଉଁ ମହିଳା ମା ସିଏ ମିଳିଲେ ସବୁ ବୋଲେ ଚାଲ ଆମେ ଜଙ୍ଗଲଟାକୁ ଜଗିବା ଛାର ଖାର ହେଇଯାଉଛି ଜଙ୍ଗଲଟାକୁ ଆମେ ମାଇପି ଝିଅ ଜଗିବା ସିଏ ସବୁ ମିଳେଇକି ଲୋକଙ୍କୁ ସନ୍ଧ୍ୟାବେଳେ ବସିଲୁ ହେଲେ ଏମିତି ଜଙ୍ଗଲ ଖଣ୍ଡକ ଆମର ଉଜୁଡ଼ି ଯାଉଛି ଆମେ କେମିତି ଆକୁ ଜଗା ରଖା କରିବା ନକଲେ ଆମେ କେଉଁଠୁ କ'ଣ ପାଇବା ଏମିତି ହେଇକି ମେଳାମେଳି ହେଇକି ଜଙ୍ଗଲ ସୁରକ୍ଷା କରିବା ବୋଲିକି ବାହାରିଲେ ଆଗ
ପ୍ରଥମରୁ ତ ଯାହାର ପାଳି ହେବ ତାଙ୍କ ଘରେ ଠେଙ୍ଗାଟା ଥୁଆ ହେବ ଏ ଠେଙ୍ଗାଟା ଥୁଆ ହେବ ତା ସେଇ ପାଳିଟା ଯେମିତି ଯିବ ତାପରେ ଆଉ ଅନ୍ୟ ଘରେ ସେଇ ଠେଙ୍ଗାଟା ଥୋଇବେ ସିଏ 4 ଜଣ ବି ଯିବେ ଏମିତି ହେଇକି ସମସ୍ତେ ଯାଉଛନ୍ତି ଆଉ
ଏମିତି ହେଇ ଏମିତି ଗଲା ହାରି କେତେବେଳେ ଏବେ ଟିକେ ଦବୁଛନ୍ତି ଜାଳ କରିବାକୁ ଇଏ ଲୋକ ତ ରହୁନାହାନ୍ତି ଏବେ ଟିକେ ରହିଛନ୍ତି ଜାଣିଲ ଆମେ ରାତିରେ 5 ଜଣ ଆସିବେ ଅଣ୍ଡୁରି ବିଲେ ଆମେ କ'ଣ କରିବୁ ମାଇକିନା ଝିଅ 4 ଜଣଟି ସକର ଓଳା ଆମେ ପାଣି ପହରା କରିକି ଯିବୁ ଆସିବେ କେଉଁଠୁ ନୟାଗଡ଼ ପାଖରୁ ରାଜପାଟଣା ବୋଲିକି ସେଇଠୁ ଆସୁଛନ୍ତି ଲୋକ ଆଉ ଏତକ ଜାଗା ଲାଠି ପଡ଼ାଠୁ ଧରିକି ଏତକ ଜାଗା ଇଏ ଆଡ଼େଣି ଜାଗା ତ ଭଲ କ'ଣ ସମସ୍ତେ କହୁଛନ୍ତି ଆମେ ବନକର ପଥକର ଦେଉଛୁ ଆମେ କେଉଁଠୁ ଜାଣିବୁ ଏମିତି କହୁଛନ୍ତି ଆଉ ସେତେବେଳେ ଡରା ହଲ୍ଲା କରୁଥିଲେ ଯେ ଏଣିକି କ'ଣ ହେବ ବା ସେଇଟା କହିପାରୁନୁ ଆମେ
ଆମକୁ ଧମକ ଦେବେ ଆମେ ଆକାଶ କଟୁରୀ ଦେଖି ଦେବୁ କଳି ଆମକୁ ଆଲାମ ନାହିଁ
ପୁରୁଷକୁ ପୁରୁଷ କାହାକୁ ମାନେ ନା ନାହିଁ
ସିଏ
ମହିଳାକୁ ଟିକେ ମାନନା ଅଛି ମାନେ ମହିଳାକୁ କାହିଁକି ମାନନା ଅଛି ମହିଳାକୁ କ'ଣ କହିପାରିଲେ ତାପରେ କଥା ଉପରକୁ ଯିବ ହରି
ପୁରୁଷକୁ ପୁରୁଷ ସିଏ ନାଗିଯିବେ ସେଥିରେ କଣ କି ଆଉ ମହିଳା ଦେହରେ କିଏ ଆଙ୍ଗୁଠି ଟିପ ଦବ କି ମହିଳାକୁ କିଏ ସୁଧି ପାରିବ କେହି ସୁଧି ପାରିବେନି
ତାପରେ ଆମକୁ ସବୁବେଳେ ଭୟଙ୍କର ଦେଖେଇଲେ ସିଏ କାଲି ଆମେ ଜଙ୍ଗଲକୁ ଯାଇଥିଲୁ କାଠଟ ପାଇଁ ତୁମେ ଆମକୁ ଜଗିଥିଲ
ହଁ ସେଥିପାଇଁ ସେ ଧମକ ଆମକୁ
ସବୁବେଳେ ଆମକୁ ଧମକ
ସେଥିପାଇଁ ତାକୁ ଆମେ ପଛକୁ କରିକି ଆମେ ଆଗକୁ
ବାହାରିଛୁ
ଏବେ ଟିକେ ଲୋକ ଟିକେ ହେଇକି ଅଛନ୍ତି ଆମେ ଜଗିଲା ଖଣ୍ଡେ ଏବେ ଫରେଷ୍ଟ ଗାର୍ଡ କହୁଛି ଜଙ୍ଗଲଟାକୁ ମୋତେ ଦେଇଦିଅ ବୋଲେ ହେଇପାରିବନି
ଜଙ୍ଗଲ ଆମ ପୁଅ ଜନ୍ମ ଦେଇଛୁ ତାକୁ ଆମ ପୁଅ ସିଏ ଯେମିତି ଗୋଟେ ପୁଅଟେ ଜନ୍ମ କଲେ ଯେମିତି ବଢଉଛୁ ଆଗକୁ ସେମିତି ବଢେଇଛୁ ଜଗି ରଖିକି
ଆମେ ବି ଖରାରେ ବି ନିଆଁ ଲଗେଇବା ବି କିଏ ଚାହିଁଲେ ଆମେ ବି ମହିଳା ଦଳ ଆସିକି ବି ନିଆଁ
ଏମିତି ଛଡ଼ଉଛୁ
ଆମ ପାଖ ପଡ଼ିଶୀ ନେଇଗଲାଣି ସିଏ ଚାହୁଁଛି ଯେ ମୁଁ ନେଇଯିବି ଆମେ ନାହିଁ କରୁଛୁ ଆମେ ଛାଡ଼ିବୁନି ଆମେ ଜଙ୍ଗଲ ବଢ଼େଇଛୁ ଯେହେତୁ ଆମେ ଛାଡ଼ିବୁନି ସିଏ ନେଇଗଲେ ଆମେ କାଠଟେ କୋଉଠୁ ନେବୁ ଛେଇ ଛେଇ କରିବେ ଆମକୁ ନା କ'ଣ
ପଟାପତ୍ର ଦାବି କରିଛୁ ସରକାରକୁ ପଟାପତ୍ର ଜଙ୍ଗଲଟାକୁ ଦେଲେ ପଟାପତ୍ର ଦେଲେ ଆମର ହବ
Thank you, Marissa. And hello, hope everybody can hear me. So thank you. Apologies, we couldn't finish the whole segment because it only has like another 2 minutes to it only. But we just wanted to share this, and I'm looking at some of the chat questions that are coming in, and hopefully this will also showcase what we really wanted to do is what women at the grassroots are taking actions in their own hands, regardless of the missing rules and regulations that lack in their communities or bringing in safeguard policies. So this I always see as a very good example of how women are really working, are the champions, are the defenders, are the healers. And these stories need to be amplified more. They need to be recognized, and their contributions should be recognized in all the environmental policies, whether it's the local, national, regional, or global. So we wanted to share these voices to also share with all of you. So I will join next to taking the set of questions. Yes, I will share the link to the movie right now. You're most welcome to again rewatch it. And this movie, I also would like to say, is the kind courtesy of a member called Vikalp Sangha. And you can look at some amazing documentation that they have done on various issues on alternative economies. Most of them are in India. So going back, I think some of the questions have been taken, but I will take my apologies if I've missed out on something. Aydah, I will take this question because I'm not sure whether Aydah is able to see it, because I do know that she has some internet connection. So Aydah, if you've responded, please let me know. But there was a question from Kake on saying that how and what is the Indigenous women involvement regarding on the issues of FPIC in the entry of the logging and mining corporations in the community? How the FPIC process is undertaken. So could you share maybe briefly a minute or two on that? Aydah? I hope we have not lost.
Okay, Tina.
Oh, yeah.
No, I'm here. Okay, thank you for that question. From what is happening on the ground in our local communities, although we have this, forestry policy, the need to must do the FP process in our communities before any logging activity takes place. The thing is, recently we're working with we're doing a case study, one of our communities in Isabel province, in Hograno at Koisisi. So I'll just talk on our experience with that from the people in the community. So what happens is, according to the forestry policy, the Ministry of Forestry, they're required to actually go out and do the implementation, and that includes awareness on all our local communities, and that also includes FPIC process and so forth. And just to give them, to make them aware of the policies and also the Forestry Act to our people in the local level. But the experience in our communities, like for the people in the Kusisi community in the Isabel province, normally there is no, what they've experienced is that there is no FPIC process before they actually had or allowed their customary land to be logged. And when asking our women, the women there, they said that they have no idea what FPIC process is. So coming back to that, it is a challenge for our people in the community, especially for our women, because it is important that we make informed decisions. And being informed is letting our people in the community level know what is going on, what all this, or how it will benefit us. So the answers we're getting from that community is that in terms of FPIC, there is never, that process is never done in the community. Thank you, Tina.
Yeah, thank you, Aydah. And I think this is really very important element of FPIC that we really talk about in discussion, is that FPIC is not one standard, one fit all. FPIC is evolving, it is very organic, and FPIC processes differ from different communities. So to be able to do FPIC, we also say that you just don't go to the community and you say we did FPIC and come back. It is a relationship and it evolves, because if you look at, we discuss about the customary laws. Customary laws are not stagnant, they're evolving. So is the FPIC process. So the FPIC process needs to be taken over time and having to get back to over time. So I hope that answers some of the questions. I see that Edna responded to Mary's question about how do we engage and in these discussions with the full implementation of CEDAW. Sorry, the chat is full, so I'm trying to see some other questions that have come up. So Mary talked about, can any one of the speakers provide an example of drawing accountability from a government for their extraterritorial obligations in providing justice for environmental damage that they companies are responsible for? I think Mary is a very big debate, because as you know, I think we all know there is a lot of discussions around asserting the rights of Indigenous peoples into the different development projects, could be one. But I'm happy to open the floor for some speaker if you have an example to share. Would any speaker would like to take that question? I think I definitely also see Jum's responses on the chat. So again, I'm really sorry if I'm missing out, if the questions have already been responded. So I will just read another comment, and again, I'll ask the speakers to see if it's a comment. It's from Jaken from Samoa, saying, thank you very much for a powerful reminder highlighted in the film. Yes, women do have a very important role within environmental justice. And it talks about, it's about getting the opportunity to express it effectively. So yeah, so thank you very much. It's more of a comment. So if there is any other questions, please put it on the chat. We have about 3 minutes. So I would ask the speakers to have this discussion. One of the key questions we wanted to ask was, how can these promising practices influence the work at the national, region, and global policy spaces to address gender and environment linkages? What would be required as concrete actions? So I will ask each of the speakers to maybe take a minute or two to respond. So Jum, can I start with you first? So how do you see this work influencing the international policy work? That could be the CBD, the work of the climate, the UNCCD, the Convention on Desertification, because all these are taking place currently.
I must accept, I must admit not that it's, although there are lots of mechanisms that has been discussing on these issues now, but the problem, the real big problem for us Indigenous women, especially women in Thailand now, is that we are lacking, we don't speak English now, we are lacking, we are having the language barrier. So yeah, how do I say now? Even they are discussing something about us, something that very relevant to our issues, our life, but we have no way now to really be part of that, to really input, to really give our feedback on that. So yeah, I can say that it's important. There are mechanisms that discussing on our issues, but it would be good now if there are more how to say channels, more opportunities for involving Indigenous communities, Indigenous women, especially to also be in the discussion. I like this forum because you provide interpretation, you provide sign language. So I really hope that in those discussion at the higher level now, they would be doing the same now, so that our voice would be taken into the discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, no, Jum, I think you hit the nail, like saying that this is where it starts. It's basic element enabling condition for participation is to make enabling environment for women. And this could be as basic as language. And I think I definitely would take this opportunity to absolutely commend and thank ERA and all the interpreters who are here to make sure that we are reaching up to those marginalized communities and our sisters and other communities through these spaces of giving these enabling mechanisms we needed to ensure that more people are engaged. So I think it's very crucial, basic element to enhance participation, inclusive participation, right? So thank you so much. That was a really big key takeover. We are running short of time, so maybe one, I will say from a minute, Aydah, you. Aydah, just a minute, and then we'll try to see if we can get the 4 speakers.
Okay, thank you, Tina. Am I on?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Thank you, Tina. So I'll just add on to what Kanlaya just said. It is important to bring women to ensure that there is inclusive women participation. So how Indigenous women can actually contribute to the climate justice and all our other mechanisms. It is important for all this process to ensure that they recognize the best practices our Indigenous women are doing on the ground. So that is very important. And also, in order to fully engage our women, it is very important to that we recognize all the issues, the gender issues that women are facing. We are always highlighting this in the forums like today. Like one of them is gender-based violence. That's for us in the Solomon Islands. How can we engage our women when we are facing this sexual and gender-based violence? This is very high in Solomon Islands. So like the video you just shared, yeah, about our Indian women there. Of course, we also have guidance of forests. We have what do we call this? Men who are heavily involved in this. Women can also participate, but we face constant, sexual violence. So this is a hiccup, or like this is what is stopping us to engage fully in biodiversity conservation and also participate well in achieving SDG goals. So it's very important that we recognize all these issues our women are facing, because that's what is stopping our women. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think you also talked about the systemic barriers and the good practices, and also looking at that it's not easy when you're talking about women going out. It's including going out to collect water or something. You hear of a lot of gender-based violence or sexual harassment taking place, and it's something that we also really need to look into further. A minute again, organizers, please let me know if I'm going on board, but I'll just take closing remark, 1 minute from Edna and then Sushila, then we'll do a wrap up.
Yeah, thank you, Tina. I think one of the things as PAWANKA, as an Indigenous-led fund, what we are trying to also advocate, since we know what is needed, is also changing of narrative and also really enhancing understanding amongst different actors, philanthropies, on the importance of really working with Indigenous women organizations, and also in terms of them also understanding what it means to be Indigenous and how they work. And we are trying to do, we are engaging in a series of dialogue really to shape that narrative, and also on how intercultural philanthropy works, and how funders as well can understand the intercultural aspect and also the integrated approach in terms of how gender and climate change are interlinked, and also how Indigenous issues are interlinked, and they have a holistic view rather than a narrow focus. And so shaping that narrative within the philanthropic space is what PAWANKA has taken up really to continue advancing that agenda, and to also open up spaces to facilitate the learning and also dialogue and continuation of these dialogues. And I think this is one of the important steps, really having those spaces where Indigenous women can also be able to speak to philanthropists and say, these are our challenges in working with you, and this is how we want to work with you. And so that is kind of agenda PAWANKA is advancing as well, to change the way funding is done to Indigenous women groups. Thank you.
Thank you, Edna. Sorry, Sushila, we're running out of time, but if you can maybe just give 2 words, that's all. 2 words to wrap up.
Thank you. Thank you. Just 2 words. I wanted to respond to some of the questions there, where regarding CEDAW General Recommendation 37, I think we need much more efforts to, to reach out to the grassroots indigenous women where they don't even know their rights, which is enshrined in CEDAW. So similarly, regarding the extraterritorial obligation, there are very, very, very limited achievements so far, but it is a challenging, constant challenging, and needs more work where there is our role. So in fact, where we are persisted in the struggle, we highly appreciate our partners, allies, and different women and social movement for recognizing our individual and collective rights, bringing sectional approach, embracing the diversity within women, and sharing spaces like this Global South Women's Forum to bring Indigenous women's issues, voices for environment justices. At the same time, we also call upon the further collaboration and partnership to unpack and deepen the understanding of unique challenges that Indigenous women face, develop the collective strategy, and act upon it together, building synergy so that every woman enjoys equal rights regardless of their intersecting identities, issues, and needs, because together we are stronger, powerful, and unbreakable. Thank you.
Oh my God, I am absolutely energized. Thank you so very much. And thank you for the organizers for giving us this few minutes to wrap up. I also want to thank all the speakers. If you can put all your cameras on for a few minutes so everybody can see you. And also I want to give up, I'm talking fast, sorry interpreters, but I want to give you a big thank you for being part of this session and for getting our messages across to our brothers and sisters everywhere. And also to Iro for giving us this opportunity to come here as a collective and share our experiences from different spaces, from different geographical locations. And I also want to give a big thank you to our documenter, Lulu, who has been visually documenting our work. So thank you very much, and please stay in touch and look out for us. So thank you very much. Bye-bye, and have a good day, good morning, good night.
Thank you.